What's up, nerds? Welcome back. As many of you have probably noticed, we're in the holiday season, and we always start off with one of my absolute favorite holidays, which is the spooky season, Halloween. So I figured in preparation for that, since I think we're about a day out now, I decided let's go ahead and talk about something that's a little bit more in line with Halloween, right? So we're going to start out by talking about vampires, with DC versus Vampires #1. So DC decided to release the first issue of this just in time for Halloween, which, if you ask me, is a pretty stupid ass thing to do. I mean, it's a 12 issue series, so I mean, if you're gonna have it for that long, why wouldn't you start it like at the beginning of October? You know what I mean? Have it start out and run through the whole thing, and then like get to like a main part, like 6 or whatever the hell. But well, no, if you were doing it every week, you'd probably get up to what, 4 by the time you actually hit Halloween. So that's what I'm saying. Why wouldn't you at the very least start it earlier instead of like kicking it off right on the week of Halloween? But whatever, they don't listen to me for advice, so it doesn't really matter. Let's kind of get into what we actually have here, because the story itself isn't that bad. It's the writing is a mixture of James Tynion and Matthew Rosenberg. So I mean, I've never really been the biggest fan of Rosenberg's stories. Tynion's stories are kind of like hit and miss for me, but for the most part, I think he's pretty solid. So we're starting out here with this mysterious, shadowy, cloaked figure who's also kind of like doing some of the narration here. And it says, "I know my coming here like this is dangerous, and I apologize, but I have nowhere else to go. I need your help. The world needs your help," because as you can see, he's showing up to the Hall of Justice, where the Justice League is currently residing. So he kind of goes on talking about how he's saying like, "We've met before and everything. I hope you might remember me. My name is Andrew Bennett." So if you know anything about like vampires within the DC universe, that name should automatically stand out, because Andrew Bennett is a character that was first introduced, I believe it was in 1981, and then he's come back here and there over the years. He came back in the New 52. I remember reading the I Vampire stories like with him in there, and he's just kind of come back sparsely since then. He was in the like Gotham City Monsters, I think it was called, and then he was also in Justice League Dark for a little while. But other than that, he hasn't really been seen all that much. So he's popping up here. Obviously, he's a vampire, so a story dealing with vampires, you're going to expect to see him in there. Anyway, he's talking about like his journey hasn't been easy. He's had to hide, he's had to run, he's had to fight. He's saying, "I'm alone, I am afraid. I, vampire, am being hunted." And then we can see here, if you will notice the close-up right there, that's very obviously Green Arrow. And then we'll see like later on where he is absolutely being pursued by Green Arrow. But first he walks out into like traffic, I'm assuming, because a car just fucking hits him, like takes him out and kind of uncovers him to the sun a little bit. So he kind of starts bursting into flames as they're all trying to like give him or like see if he's okay. Well, not okay, but seeing how badly he's injured. And then that's when he starts bursting into flames due to the sunlight. So he goes and he tries to like get his hat or whatever. But then we can see where he's taken over by a green glow, because it's Green Lantern who comes up and he's like, "Okay, everybody, like, calm down. You know, nothing to see here. This isn't the first time we've had, you know, someone on fire, especially on the footsteps of the Hall of Justice or whatever." So he's saying it's just another normal day here. So they take him inside. They have him kind of like patched up. I mean, you would assume in a room without any windows. And then he kind of like wakes up and is telling Green Lantern like, "I need to speak to the Justice League, like the entire Justice League right now." And so Green Lantern's telling, or Hal is telling him like, "Well, actually they're not all here right now. Like they're actually all off planet. They're all on a mission right now. I'm just here to kind of like hold down the fort until they get back." He's like, "So what's going on?" He says, "You're welcome to hang tight until they get back in a day or two, or you can talk to me." And then that's where we see, the hell is his name? Oh, okay, Zan. Zan of the Wonder Twins comes in. So he like pops in. You can already tell like Green Lantern is just like annoyed as shit with him, because he comes in and he's like, "Hey, have you seen? Hey, who's this guy?" And he's like, "And him. But sometimes less is more." So he tells him like, "Zan, shut the door, please. Our guest here has some mild photosensitivity issues." And he just tells him like, "Who's gonna take a picture here?" He's like, "No, I mean he's a vampire, Zan." So And that's where Xan is saying, like, no way, that's pretty far out. You're not going to try to eat me, are you, mister? Because I have to warn you, I'm a member of the Justice League. So, of course, like, Hal has to tell him, like, you're sort of a member. And he's like, well, Superman said I was pretty important, or whatever. So, Andrew asks him, like, what he knows about vampires. And he's like, oh, well, they tend to, like, suck people's blood and all that shit. And, of course, Hal has to tell him, like, show some respect. And then Andrew's telling him, like, it's all right. I should be more specific. What do you know of Mary, Queen of Blood? And that's where Hal basically tells him, like, well, I know that she was, like, your ex or whatever the hell, and y'all kind of just had, like, your differences and shit like that. He says, hate that. And she's basically the president of vampires, right? So he tells him, like, Mary Queen of Blood is a vampire elder. She is the leader of the cult of the Blood Red Moon. Her wish is law among vampires. And basically, the only reason why vampires aren't just constantly hunting people is because she doesn't want them to, so he's saying, like, she sets the tone all other vampires follow. So Hal is saying, like, okay, so she's less George Washington and more Charles Manson. She's more like a cult leader instead of just like a pragmatic leader. So he's saying, like, you joke, but it is because of her that vampires have mostly kept their distance from humans for the last 100 years. He's like, and? So he tells him, well, she's dead. So now there's really nothing holding them back from, like, hunting people and shit. So, of course, Hal has to tell him, like, well, you did just say she's your nemesis, and she's, like, your ex and shit, so I kind of have to ask, did you kill her? So Andrew says no. He says, I spent weeks hunting her killer, chasing rumors, crashing into dead ends, shaking down anyone who might know anything, all of which led me to one place, the Legion of Doom. So we get that classic Legion of Doom type of like base and shit, which I love this base design. Like, it just looks so cool. Anyway, he shows up there and he's saying, like, every lead I could find led me there. So he decided, he needed to infiltrate and see what was going on. And Hal tries to tell him, like, well, that's easier said than done. He's like, yeah, usually, well, maybe usually. But as you can see, he's able to turn into a bat. So he was very easily able to just, like, fly in there and shit. And as soon as he walked in, he found out, oh, shit, they're all dead. They've all been, like, drained of their blood and shit. So, of course, he realizes, shit, they already got here. And it was the vampires that killed them. Like, they're the ones who did all of this shit. So he's saying, I feared at first that it would mean a coming war with the humans, but seeing their plans laid out, a shield to block out the sun, human farms and slaughterhouses, lists of potential targets, or perhaps even allies, I realized the goal was not to start a war. Their goal is the genocide of the human race. I needed to get away and tell the world what was coming, but seeing what they'd already accomplished and not knowing even who they were, I didn't know who I could trust. So we can see where he finds, like, Lex looking all battered and shit, and he's still actually alive. So he tries to stake him, saying, like, oh, did you think I wouldn't take out more of you with me before I died and shit? So, of course, they kind of struggle for a minute, and he's trying to tell him, like, look, I'm here to fight against them too. He's like, wait, so you're not with them? And he says, no, I'm not. Who are they? So Lex tells him the question is, who aren't they? And I don't know. Maybe they don't even know anymore. I assumed all of you were in league together. You saw what they had planned in there. Will you fight back? And he's like telling him, like, yeah, of course. So he said, he like writes down an address, which is basically to the Hall of Justice. And he says, here, go there and tell them about everything that you've seen and heard. And he's like, but wait, how am I going to get them to believe me? So like Lex pulls out a fucking syringe and like takes out some of his blood. And he says, I'll be back soon. You have to go now. And he's like, what about you? He says, I wouldn't survive the trip. So, because when he gives him, like, the thing, he's like, yeah, make them believe with this. So he says, I wouldn't survive the trip, but it's all right. Maybe you won't either. Before you go, you must do something for me. So he's telling him, like, kill me. So he goes in to do, like, the regular vampire thing. He's like, all right, I guess I can. He's like, no, you idiot. Not like that. He was like, you have to do it with your hands. Like, kill me for real. Like, kill me physically, not turning me into a vampire. So he's like, all right, so be it. Yeah, and that's where he says, let the world, like, as he's choking him out and shit, he's like, let the world know it was me who saved them. So that's where, like, he leaves from there, and we see where Scarecrow and Gorilla Grodd, who are now vampires and shit, are going around, and then they're presumably the ones who I guess are just on guard duty, and they realize Lex has gotten out. And so he says, Gorilla Grodd says, like, Luthor is trying to escape, and then they find him, and Scarecrow's like, no, he isn't, because they see his dead body. So Gorilla Grodd immediately, like, figures out, oh shit, that means somebody else is here, so sound the alarm so we can figure out who it is. So of course Andrew's trying, and I don't know why he's trying to run out. Like, you just turned into a bat, why not turn into a bat again and just fly out? But anyway, he's running through the base, and then he gets attacked by Riddler, who's like, whoa, where are you going? Like, aren't you one of us? Shouldn't you be trying to help us? And then he finds the syringe full of Lex's blood. So Andrew tells him, like, well, because he asks, what is this? And then Andrew tells him, you asked too many questions, before he stabs him in the eye with some of the blood. He doesn't empty all of it, just some of it. And he sees that immediately it turns Riddler into ash. So somehow Lex figured out a way, obviously, to make it to where his blood is, like, poisonous against them. So he even, like, I think somewhere in here he says, what's coming will turn friends into foes and make allies of our enemies. I've been running for almost a week to get to you, moving in the daytime to avoid them. No matter what I do, they get closer every day. Their agents are everywhere. So in this, like, bottom one, you can see where Green Arrow is kind of perched up on a rooftop, kind of watching him and shit. So judging from the cover, we can assume Green Arrow is going to be one of the people fighting back against them. So there's that. So he's not one of the vampires trying to kill him or whatever. But we're about to see where it is going to take a sudden turn and shit. So Andrew finishes by saying, like, vampires have taken over the Legion of Doom, and they've installed vampires in other places as they prepare for war. They could be anywhere. And Zan asks him, like, well, why should we believe you? And Hal says, Andrew, I know you're upset, but he has a point. A vampire plan to take over the world, the Legion has already fallen, and all of this being told to us by a vampire. You have to understand how this all sounds. Do you have any proof? And Andrew's just like, no. Like, you would think that would be where he would give him the syringe. But we'll see where that goes in a second. So he says, and nobody else saw any of this? You didn't even tell anyone else? He's like, no. I came to tell the Justice League because I didn't know who else I could trust. So this is where Zan fucks up, and it means like, oh, okay, well, I can go tell the rest of them. And then he gets cut off because he's like, Andrew's like, wait, they're here? Because if you remember, Hal told him they're all off planet. So that's where Hal all of a sudden, like, seizes him with the power of the ring, and he's saying, like, oh, I wish you hadn't said that. So he immediately he starts, like, showing where, yes, he is a vampire and shit. So he starts telling him, like, a funny word, well, because, like, Andrew calls him a traitor, and he says, like, a funny word coming from you, sneaking here to beg the humans to stop our kind from taking what is rightfully ours. You betrayed us. I didn't betray anyone. I evolved. So that's where he, like, continues to, like, put a tighter grip on Zan. And then we can see where he puts him in this, like, projection, and then he also has him tied up by the neck by a rope and shit. And then he's like saying, he was a bit much sometimes, but he was a good kid. He wouldn't even be involved if you hadn't stuck your nose into our plans, Andrew. You did this to him. So that's where we see the rope snaps, and then all of a sudden, if you can see in the background, he's in a giant blender. So we just blended up Zan, and I don't know why. Like, I've never really had a specific reason to hate the Wonder Twins, but something about that was just very satisfying to me. You know what I mean? Seeing him chopped up into, like, viscera and shit. And then, of course, Hal being a vampire now, he immediately goes and, like, fills a mug with, like, the bloody remains and starts drinking it. And, of course, they make a small reference here to Zan's power, because if you remember, his sister is able to change into the form of animals, and then Zan always changed it to, like, well, she changes to the shape of animals. He changes into the form of, like, something water-related. So, of course, like, Hal drinks and he's like, a bit watery. So I thought that was a little bit funny, but yeah, they had to make that reference anyway. So he says, you seem very skittish for one of our kind, Andrew. He's like, our kind? But I saw you go out in the sun to get me. So this is where he explains to him, like, yeah, you know, the sun, basically the thing that kills us is the ultraviolet rays, and that's light. So my ring is able to, like, control and filter out light. So it's able to, like, absorb the sunlight, and it doesn't actually hurt me because of that. So he says, my powers are all, yeah, and that's where he says, filtering it away from me, or creating that very same light for me to use. And that's where he sets Andrew on fire and shit. So as he's starting to torture him with that, he's asking him, like, I'm just going to ask you one, I'm only going to ask you this once. Did you tell anyone else about your plans to come here? About our plans before you came here? And he's like, no, I spoke with no one. So he's like, all right, thank you, Andrew, for being honest with me. I will make this quick. And he just tells him, like, go to hell. He's like, no need. We're going to actually bring that here as he watches him die and shit. So once he does that, he makes a call to his master saying, like, yeah, I encountered Bennett. I was able to put him down, but I think we're safe. Like, nobody knows anything. He told me nobody else knows anything. So he says, once I dump this blender out, there will be no evidence. No, it's not important. Goodbye, master. So he, like, pours the shit down the drain and everything, and that's when Aquaman walks in and is like, oh, there you are. Like, Batman called a meeting. Like, you're supposed to be in the meeting room and shit. And he says, oh, sorry, Arthur. Just washing up. I ate something that didn't agree with me. So he says, you don't know where Queen is, do you? Nobody's seen him in days. He's like, nope, but you know Ollie. He'll turn up. So he says, is it really dusty in here? Because if you remember, he just burned someone to ashes and shit. And then that's where we go over to the Batcave, and Batman showing up as Alfred's telling him like, "Oh, good, you're back. Like there was a message that was left for you and everything." And so he's telling like someone stopped by upstairs, so he's saying, "I'm guessing they didn't have an appointment." To which Alfred's like, "I wasn't aware the Batman was taking appointments now." So he just asks like, "Who was he?" and everything. He says he didn't say. A peculiar man, quite nervous. He's like, "I'm guessing the security cameras couldn't find a match in my files." He says, seeing as he was entirely bandaged up like a mummy, the answer would be no. So he says, but he left you a note, and that's where we kind of see is basically just full of all of the internal monologuing we saw from Andrew through the majority of the issue. So he says, oh yeah, and he also left this syringe saying that Lex Luthor might have just saved the world. So of course that gets Bruce's attention, and that's where we leave off on this for now. But yeah, like I said, as you can see like from the cover, basically the two main heroes here, I'm assuming, are going to be Batman and Oliver Queen. So we'll see how that particular thing plays out. Overall, I thought this was a pretty interesting premise, like the Justice League being turned into vampires and all this shit. It's a little bit akin to what we had with like Blackest Night, except there, like they were only resurrecting like people who were already dead, or they were killing them and then resurrecting them with the Black Lantern rings. This one, it's literally people who are being turned into vampires. So you know what I mean? Like they're living, and then I do want to see how exactly it was that Hal got turned into a vampire. That should be interesting to find out, because I mean apparently it's spreading pretty damn fast, and not everybody is aware that it's even happening yet. So they're playing the long con, the vampires are, which I guess makes sense considering this is a 12 issue limited series. But yeah, we'll see what comes from that. Like I said, overall it does seem like an interesting premise, so I'm willing to keep reading it just based off of that. And I've always loved vampires, you know, before Twilight came along and fucked them up, but I've always loved vampires, like the actual kind. So yeah, we'll see where that goes. I don't know if anybody out there has had a chance to pick this up and read it. If so, definitely feel free to let me know, because as I've mentioned, 'tis the season. We are in the spooky holiday season right now for like a few more days. Then everybody's going to switch to Thanksgiving. Well, really, everybody sort of gets into Thanksgiving, but just because of the food. Really, everybody's going to switch into Christmas mode coming right after Halloween. So be ready for that. We'll see what comes from this story moving forward as we talk about it in, you know, the coming months that aren't going to have anything to do with vampires, but at least they started it out right before Halloween. So there's that, I guess. But yeah, if you read this and you have any thoughts on it, if you haven't read it and you have any thoughts on it, do feel free to share that with me down in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely make sure to like the video, subscribe, make sure you are subscribed, share the video out because I appreciate it so very much from all of y'all. And if you're done here, then go and read a book. And if not, then I'll see you on my next video.